Hi, I'm Danielle Smith. I'm president of Alberta Enterprise Group. We're collaborating with Common Sense Calgary to interview candidates for the upcoming municipal race in Calgary. It takes place October the 18th. And joining me now is your candidate for Ward 9, Tim Lipp. Tim, thanks so much for being with me today.
My pleasure.
Let's talk a little bit about why it is you decided to run. What motivated you to put your name forward?
Well, it was mostly as a result of some work I was doing in the nonprofit sector. Come from a tech background, and before that worked in international development. And I just realized that Calgary has a really unique municipal structure that allows us to, I think, prototype and build solutions more quickly than other cities. And I want to be part of making that happen.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you think makes Calgary so unique? And give us an example of what you do differently.
Specifically in Canada, what we have is we have community associations, right? So we have this large structured network of volunteers set up around the city. And when we're looking at some really big problems like climate change and Indigenous rights, I think having volunteer groups spread around the city is incredibly powerful.
All right. So you've got you're up against an incumbent, Giancarlo Carra. When you look back on his record, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I don't think, no. I haven't actually done a lot of analysis on his record because I've been kind of focused on building my own career over the last couple of years, except for maybe one thing. And that is when I met with him to try and pitch my tech company, I would have asked him to support that a little bit more.
Okay. Well, then let's talk a little bit more about what it is that you're hearing in your community as you door knock. What are the three big issues in Ward 9?
Three big issues are, I would say, mass unemployment, concern about climate change. And then the last one is, for lack of a better term, some kind of like cultural genocide, or where people's rights and freedoms are being lost. And you see that, I see it kind of in two ways. One, people's concern about the pandemic and the vaccine masks mandates taking away their rights. But you also see it with, and historically, how Canada as a nation took away Indigenous rights for hundreds and hundreds of years. So yeah, those are kind of the three issues.
What would you think that you could do about those at the municipal level? Let's maybe take them in parts. Climate change, let's talk about that first. What kind of policies would you like to enact at the civic level that would be different than what the city's doing right now?
So the city right now enables coordination around water, roads, and other transportation. But one thing we don't coordinate is how to make it easier for neighbors to purchase things together. And neighbors to actually solve other problems together, because climate change is fundamentally solved or created more than anything else with a high level of consumption we have in the city. And so if the city actually takes some momentum around how to actually help neighbors collaborate better, I think we could have some real big impacts on climate change and build a more integrated, happy community.
And what about the cultural issues you're talking about? Is that related to the defund the police movement that we've seen in the last year, or is it something different?
No, it wouldn't, not at all related to defund the police. More about enabling, making it easier, kind of almost like increasing people's capacity to be involved in the civic governance. Okay. And that's why I like community associations as an example of that.
Okay. Well, you also talked about mass unemployment. Give me some sense of what you're hearing from your constituents. Where are they? Because we often hear that we're recovering better post-COVID than some of the other provinces. We're expected to see some pretty dramatic growth rates. Where do you see the problems being?
So I hear that. I tried to focus most of my door knocking on the more low-income communities of Ward 9. And I think you encounter mass unemployment as a concern there. People are really stressed about their jobs, but they're also stressed about the fact that there are less and less meaningful work opportunities. And that's part of just how automation as a thing works. It's always going to automate the kind of mid-range of the employment sector. So a lot of people that are going to school are losing the opportunities for those entry-level jobs. And as a result, that's just kind of creating a wave of people who have nothing else to do that feels meaningful other than just sitting on a couch and collecting a CERB check.
So what do you think you can do about that at the municipal level?
So this is based kind of out of some of the conversations I've had at, like, in the community of Ogden. I encountered a young professional who was looking for a space to work with other young professionals. And community associations could be an excellent convening space for those kind of collaborations, which are also the spawn of real innovation. And when you have a group of people living in close proximity who are then coordinated, you can identify needs much more quickly, which kind of forms the backbone of what entrepreneurship really is about.
All right. Let's talk then a little bit about the role of municipal government. What do you think the main purpose of municipal government is?
I think the main purpose of municipal government is to kind of be continually reimagining what democracy can look like in society without a lot of the rhetoric that provincial and federal governments need to be a part of. So
And
one of
why?
the cool things,
Okay.
yeah, one of the cool things about Calgary is that we don't actually have, or Canada in general, is we don't have parties at the municipal level,
Hmm.
which means it's about people who live on a street voting for someone who lives a couple streets away from them. And now that gets difficult as our city gets bigger and we have to find solutions and systems around that. But that's, I think, one of the best things about municipal politics.
Well, and it creates some challenges because it means you get elected as an independent and you have to be able to convince at least 7 others on council to vote in sync with you.
Yeah.
Give me some example maybe from your history about how you would approach that kind of complex problem of bringing people together to support an idea so that you could get your ideas implemented.
Yeah. So one example would be maybe even just from my tech company. I recruited a diverse team of different people around how to solve a specific problem. And that was, how do we automate the process of home energy audits, so to decrease taxpayer dollars and increase value for the consumer. Brought just a group of different people together, and we were able to execute a couple different iterations of our business plan quite effectively.
Okay. You also have a role that you have to play as an oversight body
Yeah.
in directing administration. So, how do you see that balance working? What's the role of the elected official versus the role of administration? Should it be more of a governance role, or do you think it should be more hands-on?
Um, hmm. Well, I think it kind of has to be both. Sometimes in the hands-on piece is more understanding what the vision of the city is, and that's kind of maybe by talking to people who are doing things in their neighborhood or actually prototyping different ideas. But the governance role is incredibly important because it is a massive organization. We need people on city council who can understand the technical elements of it and ask difficult questions to make sure that there aren't people acting in their own interests rather than interests of the city and specifically the ward.
Okay, let's talk about some of the big picture issues because one of the big things you have to do is oversee the budget process, the
Yeah.
spending, setting the mill rate. So let's talk about spending for a minute. When you look at how much the city government is spending, do you think it's too much, too little, or do you think it's about right?
Mm. Uh, I don't like that. I would say probably too much, actually. Yeah.
Why would you say that? What are you hearing?
Well, I think it's just too much without more granular information of what people in neighborhoods are struggling with. An example of that is just today I was riding down the Bow River Pathway and saw more and more sections blocked off in construction for the Green Line. And I've seen a bunch of different projects popping up around the neighborhood, like on 17th Ave, to replace paving that wasn't actually that bad.
Hmm.
And it makes me wonder, well, is it because of the election timing or why is this being done? But at the end of the day, it's because I think there's too much money being spent without granular information on what the needs and pain points are at the neighborhood level.
Okay, let me ask you about one of the big ticket items that the city has to pay for, which is salaries and benefits for staff. So I'll deal with this in a couple of different levels. So first of all, do you think that the city councilor role? Do you think it's the compensation is set appropriately, or do you think that it needs to be reduced in any way?
The one kind of focus point I put on my recent platform update is that I think that what I want to do, at least, and this is only for my own candidacy, I wouldn't make this a norm for all the council candidates, but essentially take the difference between the average woman's income in my riding, which is $30,000, and city councilor salary, which is $113,000, and make that pot of $82,000 something that the councilor has to earn back over the course of each year. Kind of to create an incentive structure. And a lot of the tools to do this already exist. When you look at how big tech companies have built really complex consumer feedback tools, you could put something similar in place so that the city councilor can actually earn the score of how well they're representing people in their riding.
Interesting idea. All right,
Yeah.
let's see if that applies to a layer below, looking
Yeah.
at the salaries for managers and administrators. So would you do anything to address some of that?
This is probably going to be really unpopular saying this, but I would say I think one of the tricky things about artificial intelligence and better information data processing is it automates the work that a lot of managers do. And that's a really uncomfortable thing. But I saw that when I worked as an auditor at PricewaterhouseCoopers in some of the audit companies I visited, I felt it with my own work. So I think, yeah, the unfortunate news, that's probably the space where there is the most freedom for budget savings, if you would.
Interesting. Okay, let's take it down to the front line level, because oftentimes what happens is that there are wage negotiations that take place and they set salaries for several years, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's out of step with what's happening in the general economy. So do you think that there needs to be any different approach to doing that frontline bargaining or any wage austerity there?
Do you mean in terms of
Bus drivers, police, fire, people who cut lawns, people who are in the swimming pools, in the lifeguard services, the whole range. People
yeah.
doing the inside work, managing the licenses and permit approvals.
Well, the wage negotiation process is one thing, but in terms of the specific value they bring to solving needs in neighborhoods, I've met fantastic city workers, and I've also been frustrated wondering what city workers were doing. So I'd have to say, I think that there is a space in which we can save money even at that level, specifically by more accurately understanding what the needs of a neighborhood are. So, for example, if the city's infrastructure was better integrated with, let's say, volunteer networks in neighborhoods, and there was a squirrel that needed to be taken, a dead squirrel that needed to be taken off the road in front of my house, why couldn't I open up my phone and say, oh, look, I could go pick that up with a shovel, throw it in the compost, save the city $100 by doing that just myself? And that is actually, there's a situation I had happen to me about 3 weeks ago. I was on the Bow River Pathway and came across a man overdosing. And some people called 911, but about 3-4 minutes before the fire truck came, there was a young Indigenous man from a group called Sober Crew who was staying at another Indigenous group's Bear Clan teepee. He arrived on a bicycle with a Narcan kit, and together we helped save this guy's life. And then 3 minutes later, $5,000 of municipal taxes showed up, and the problem was already solved.
So do you think that the architecture already exists to use apps or programs that way, or would that be something that has to be created?
Some of it already exists. A lot of it's going to have to be created, but at the very least, we need to have the conversation.
Very interesting. Okay, let's talk about taxes. Are you hearing any concern about taxes when you go door to door?
Definitely. It would be a mistake for anyone not to complain about taxes when a politician is talking to them.
So now you're going to get a lot more of it. So let me take it in two pieces then. Because there has been a big tax shift in 2019 as they're trying to bring the level of business taxes down, so that Calgary remains competitive, not only province-wide, but also with its neighbors. But that has caused the residential rate to go up. So do you support that approach on a tax shift?
It's just fascinating. Really reflects what people have said about the world being a flat place and capital being mobile, that fundamental reality. And I think that's where the city really has to think more about how they move information. But to answer your question specifically, I think it actually, it makes sense, but I think perhaps it does make sense. But what needs to be brought into the conversation is, how do we understand what a business is in the context of like the needs it serves inside the city versus outside the city? perhaps there could be a way to come to more of a middle ground. And local businesses are a great example of that,
So,
because
yeah.
yeah, a local business really embodies kind of the best of both worlds, and especially if the business is deeply integrated with the neighborhood around it. And in Inglewood, my area, we've been doing this thing called Car Free Sundays, and that's been a great example of it. Like business and the community collaborating together to solve the process as a whole.
So let me ask you the question about taxes that was similar to the one I asked you on spending. So
Yeah,
philosophically, when you're approaching the issue of taxes, would you prefer to see a decrease that or hold the line, have it stay the same, or do you think there
right.
needs to be increased to bring more money in?
I'd like to see a decrease, and mostly because the way I kind of view the city as a system as a whole is it's very similar to a body in some ways, where in the human body we have at the end of our skin cells we've got direct current, and in our veins we've got alternating current. So there's different levels of the transfer of resources around the system as a whole, and you need to have the alternating current to move goods and services quickly, but you also need to have direct current, which is very rapid and on the ground. And so the less taxes is better as a whole, because it means you have more money moving on the ground.
All right. You have an interesting way of putting it. It must come from your tech training. Tell me a little bit more about your tech background, because you mentioned you work for PricewaterhouseCoopers, you started a tech company. Anything more from your resume that you think might make you a good council member?
I think it's actually my very first job was working in Nepal, conducting research with minority language communities. And one of the things I realized there was that if kids learn how to read in their own mother tongue, their potential for succeeding at university is 10 times better. To help facilitate that, we published a report that is now impacting a community of 300,000 minority speakers in Nepal. And that kind of geospatial linguistic information understanding is really what drove me to this, and also why I'm so passionate about Indigenous communities, because I think we have a lot to learn from them.
Well, that's a good way then perhaps of transitioning into the issue of affordable housing,
Yeah.
because it sounds like you've got quite a diverse community, and you're seeing a lot of vulnerable communities. And I'm interested in knowing, when I say affordable housing,
Mhm.
what does that mean to you? What do you think the biggest concern in Calgary is?
Right now, I think in many ways, Calgary's housing landscape is a little bit of a battle zone between renters and owners.
Hmm.
And it's set up as a no-win situation where in order for owners to have asset value, the prices have to go up, but it also makes life a lot more difficult for renters. And the only way I see a solution around that is to kind of create almost like a digital record for what a space that both renters and owners can contribute to together, and increasing the value of the property, but also making life easier for the renter. And that's a little bit what my tech company was about. But I think affordable housing is a huge challenge, working with a couple different groups on maybe some prototypes for what can make that better. One of the things that's really powerful with the Blackfoot way of knowing is a teepee is a house, but it's also a teaching instrument, and it's also mobile. So I think even if we were to bring the question of affordable housing, like if city council was to invite more, I think, Indigenous leaders to the place to actually prototype solutions, I think we could have a much better solution for everyone.
It's interesting, because the guidebook for great communities was pretty controversial. You're talking about quite a bit of mixed use, which I think
Yeah.
may have been part of the
Yeah.
controversy that we saw before. But how do you balance that? Because another aspect of affordable housing is that when you want your first home, oftentimes that's out in the suburbs, where
Yeah.
it's smaller lots and so
Yeah.
easier access. But then there's also this pressure: do you densify and build up instead? What's how do you balance that conversation?
I think densify can be a bit distracting. And this is one of the biggest frustrations I have with the guidebook, actually, so I care a ton about the environment. And there was one page on the environment, and it was kind of glossed over the fact that, and they didn't even mention the fact that with all the technology we have today, you can't get an efficient building that compensates for its inefficiency in terms of height if you go over 6 stories. So densification at the 5-story level is environmentally friendly. Densification at that 15-story isn't.
Interesting.
Unless And technology could change radically, and that could all change. But that's a part of the conversation that I don't think is really happening. And I do really like one thing that is unique about Calgary is when you purchase a home, you're also just creating like a large physical space that expresses who you are as a person. And that gives you a lot of agency. So when people are looking in for affordable housing, they're going to look for something with more agency and more dignity. And a house does that often better than a building, a condo in a 20-story tower does.
So are you in favor of more greenfield development?
I am in favor of greenfield development, but I think there are two parts of the conversation that aren't happening. They need to be happening. One, the height in terms of its real big picture environmental impacts, and two, the dignity of those who are in the homes.
Okay. Well, we talked a bit about the
Yeah.
operating side of the budget. We haven't had a chance to talk about the infrastructure side of the budget. Just
Yeah.
talked about housing here for a moment. Let's turn it closer to discussing about city infrastructure. So they've got four major capital projects, and we'll go through them one by one. Or I'll put it to you this way: the event center, which is the sports center with the Calgary Flames, the BMO Center expansion, the Arts Commons transformation, and the Foothills Fieldhouse. When these were first put forward, the CFO said that they didn't have the money to do all four of them, but they proceeded anyway. If you'd been there and only had the opportunity to choose one or two, which one or two would you have chosen?
Probably two would have been the BMO Event Center and Arts Commons.
So let's talk about each of them. Why is the BMO Center a priority for you?
Because I think it is important. Sometimes you need to get a bunch of people together to have a really big party, and there needs to be a space for that.
And Arts Commons, same thing, or a little bit different?
Arts Commons, because I think, more than anything else, I aspire to be an artist, and I think art is just a fundamental expression of who we are. So. You'll see that out through my campaign. I'm trying to be as artful as I can in the execution of it. So yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about another big ticket item, the Green Line LRT, which had a lot of buy-in when under its original proposal, which would have been 40 kilometers, go from deep south to deep north through the downtown, and be, I think, in the order of $5 billion. Now, of course, the project's been cut in half, and the price has been escalated, and it doesn't go either deep north or deep south. So what would you propose to do to remedy that problem?
Well, I think the Green Line frustrates me as an environmentalist, but also as an information scientist or curious person, just because of how much the world has changed in 5 years. And it shows why our city making processes are really behind the ball, because information is moving faster with each generation, with each year, than it ever has before. And the Green Line is almost an embodiment of that as a problem. But I love public transit. I don't have a car. I actually set up a car with my neighbor and do a car share with her. So I'm a huge fan of public transit, but I just don't feel like big infrastructure projects embody it as much as really grassroots coordination.
Interesting. I'm hearing you suggest that perhaps you'd cancel the Green Line LRT.
I don't think that's actually, from my understanding of it, that's not actually a possibility, just with all the federal provincial funding. But who knows? Maybe I can open up a conversation with the federal and provincial government saying, hey, this big pot of money, rather than diverting it to a huge infrastructure project, why don't we divert it towards a huge initiative that helps neighbors coordinate their rides a lot more efficiently. And you can solve transport a lot more effectively that way.
All right. Let's talk a bit about the economy, because you'd mentioned some of the concerns you're hearing about job losses. Let me first ask you about oil and gas, because the downtown office towers were populated by a lot of oil and gas companies. They've been hollowed out significantly. Do you still think that there are good jobs to be had in the oil and gas sector?
Yeah, there are good jobs behind the oil and gas sector. I think we need to move away from fossil fuels, but Canada still has some of the cleanest fossil fuels we have. So it's a reality, but also something we can make better.
What would you want to see when you're talking about diversifying the economy in Calgary? What do you think is the solution to try to fill those office towers again?
Well, to fill the office towers and diversify the economy, I think are different things, because
we'll deal with them in parts. So what do you do about the downtown, the emptying out of downtown?
emptying out the downtown, increase as many other alternate possibilities for that space. So whether that's living or even like urban farming. That was one of my first business plans, was actually urban farming conversion for downtown offices. So, and I've worked on an urban farming company, so I know that's a possibility. Something like that is what I'd love to see, especially with other climate change concerns that are happening.
Okay. And what about the other side, diversification?
So Calgary already has like become a hot spot for, I would say, socially focused tech companies. We have Benevity, which is recently had an almost $1 billion IPO, I believe. Solium, or maybe it was Solium, also like there's a socially focused tech component there. So there's a bunch of tech companies that are already doing that. We just need to keep doing more of that.
Okay. What about the $100 million given to Calgary economic development? Do you like that kind of approach to business development, giving direct grants to individual companies?
I don't really. I think, I participated in some of, well, actually not Calgary economic development, but some of the Innovate Calgary things. And as an entrepreneur, I didn't find it extremely helpful. I think there are some good initiatives happening, but I don't like, I think it's risky to putting all your eggs in one basket is not really how tech works, unless we're like a venture firm. But money is capital, so why does the city need to be doing that? Sorry, money is fluid, so why does the city need to be doing that?
Okay. Now I have a bunch of other issues that didn't really fall under any category, but they've come up in the last year, and so I want to get your thoughts on them. So I mentioned earlier what was calling itself the defund the police movement. What does that mean to you, and what do you think we should take from that?
That people are really pissed off and feel like they're not safe around the police. One of the best solutions is this group called Bear Clan that I've been doing volunteering with. They patrol the streets, they give out food, they create better space of safety, but they're also a little bit of they can be a witness if there is a police injustice happening. And because they're Indigenous led, they have, I think, a much more holistic understanding of what community policing is about. So I really support those groups. And they have I want to make it easier for the Calgary Police Service to collaborate and support these kind of initiatives.
All right. Let me ask you, it's sort of another policing issue, but from a different perspective. The city voted to reduce residential speed limits from 50 kilometers an hour to 40 kilometers an hour in sort of the residential areas.
Yeah.
There are some who thought it should go even further, 30 kilometers per hour. What do you think?
I love this question. One of the things that came up at door knocking session was a 60-year-old man came out and was so irate about the speed limit because he doesn't want to see a child get over, which is beautiful because that's his empathy popping out. And what I think a solution would be for him would be, why don't we create, 40 kilometers an hour is probably decent speed reduction. The technology is not that difficult to create more speed, like radar-based speed slow down signs in areas that are especially dangerous. And that could be a citizen-led initiative.
All right. Let's talk a bit about privatization. So you've got an entrepreneurial background yourself. Yep. There have been some forays into doing public-private partnerships, some discussion about privatizing garbage collection. They already privatized half of garbage collection in Edmonton, and there was a discussion of a pilot project in Calgary. Golf courses, as another example. Are these the kind of innovations that you would support? Do you think that there is a role for public-private partnerships or private delivery of public services?
Definitely a space for public-private partnerships, and I'd say some space for private delivery of services. But the biggest piece that we're missing right now is we don't have enough civic involvement, like the civic volunteer involvement. And that's a key to how Calgary grew for over the last 100 years. 100 years ago, there was a huge real estate crash in Calgary. And what did the city do? But we converted real estate empty lots into gardens. And that's things like that are in Calgary's history. I think we just need to bring them back.
All right. Now, you mentioned public art, but as you know, the public art program has been very controversial with the Big Blue Ring and the Beaufort Towers, and there's a few others. Do you think that they have resolved the issues with some of the changes that they made, or do you think that public art should be approached differently?
I think we always need to do more work to support public art and artists. I think, public art initiative that's not well known is something like the Music Mile in Inglewood, where we have a bunch of people collaborated together to create a space that's kind of the place to go if you want to hear live music. That's a great example of a partnership that had very little municipal cost but huge value in terms of the benefit it brings to the community.
But what about the public art program in particular? Because it takes a portion of infrastructure projects, put it into a fund, and then they've got
Yeah,
a body that then determines how it's going to be spent. I mean, what you're talking about sounds very community led.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
is there a different approach that you think should be taken on the larger approach to public
I'd say
art?
probably more of the money just needs to be taken from very centralized administration to decentralized, because art is something that can scale naturally. When you see something incredible, you share it with someone, and that's that's in some ways the most effective way to identify what is good art.
Why do you think art is so important? Because we've got into it a couple of times. What does it bring for you? Why would you think that that's so central?
Just in terms of my own health and happiness, but also because it's fundamentally what makes us humans separate from just being consumption machines. And when society is having conversations about things like universal basic income, we need to shift away, I believe, from thinking of ourselves as being consumption machines, because otherwise we're all going to end up, if UBI becomes a thing, we're all going to end up sitting on a couch watching Netflix. Whereas if you focus it around art, we end up becoming people who are sitting in a garage creating a painting, or being absorbed in something beautiful where the process itself is the reward.
All right. Thanks for that answer. Let me ask you about a couple of other things just related to your role as an elected council member. So there is going to be a referendum on fluoride. You can comment on that if you like, but I'm kind of interested in understanding where you think the role is of you as an elected council member making decisions, or do you think that more of these types of decisions should go to a general vote of the general public?
That's exactly what is going to be discussed at the upcoming election hangover party, which is going to be the weekend of September 20th. We're bringing a bunch of comedians together, and also some tech solution people. Essentially, I'm organizing it, inviting all the Ward 9 candidates to come together and pitch for what their plan is to automate politicians. And we probably won't actually end up automating politicians, but we'll have some really good conversations and I think build momentum towards that process.
So what I'm hearing you say is that potentially we could have a lot more direct democracy and then not
Oh,
need
a ton
politicians at all?
A ton more.
And why is that? Because it's funny, most of the candidates I've spoken with would go the other way, say that there's only a very few things that should be put to the general vote of the people. That the role of the representative is to represent. Why do you see it so differently?
Well, I think it's because at the end of the day, democracy is about allowing the people to make decisions. And 200 years ago, the only way we could manage information as a society was with paper that we could carry around. For that kind of context, paper carried around in like 4-year election cycles, a constitution, the rule of law based off of paper that we can carry around is really important. But now we live in a completely different information age. So there's an incredible amount of opportunities to take the complex problems we're facing and scale them down to the neighborhood. That's what my tech company was about, was trying to take climate change, the biggest global problem we're facing, and scale it down to what I could do with my neighbors. That is in many ways, I think, what democracy is about.
Interesting. Okay, so then I wonder how you'll answer this last question, which is that you will sometimes be faced with a situation where the administration recommends a certain course of action, but your constituents want you to go in a different direction. It becomes a bit more complicated the way you're talking about this, because you've got different communities even that might want you to vote differently. How would you approach those issues?
Well, I mean, let's give an example to make it less simple. There is the 20-story development going up in Inglewood, where administration said we need to densify, we need to put these tall buildings in. And the constituents, I was one of them, were clearly opposed to it. And I think as a rule, I'd always tend towards going with the constituents. It wouldn't always be the case, because sometimes there are things that are more complex. But every single time where that conflict happens, the next time I should be able to have more information to talk about the constituents' problems rather than the administration's problems, because gathering together the stories of 6,000 people in a neighborhood is really difficult. Getting a report from 3 people in an office is really easy. But there is software technology that the tech companies have proven that makes it much more effective to gather together 6,000 stories into a product roadmap of what a specific thing should be.
All right, Tim, I should let people know where it is they can find you on your website. Why don't you just pitch that to us now so that people know where they can find out more?
Yeah, the website is Tim Lipp YYC or Tim Lippy, but timlippyc.ca or .com. You can find me there. It's probably the best way.
All right. Did I say your name wrong? Is it Tim Lippy or is
No,
it
it is Tim Lipp.
You're just a little lippy.
When I typed in YYC at the end, people are always saying Tim Lippy. I'm like, great. I guess that's it now.
All right. I'll try to say goodbye to you using your proper name. That was Tim Lipp. He is your candidate for Ward 9. Thanks so much for the conversation today.
Thank you.